belong to every Ugandan by virtue of the Constitution, and security agencies must operate within the law, with every citizen enjoying equal protection under it. Right Honorable Speaker and colleagues, sometimes government blames opposition, civil society and media houses for making the country look bad. But if we are to be honest with ourselves, we would realize that some government officials contribute a great deal to making our country look bad. Whenever people are abducted and tortured, or when media houses get closed arbitrarily, these violations of the law make it to international press, and you've been seeing international press report about these issues. How then do we expect tourists to come to our country with all these negative situations? In commitment fees, on loans signed but not yet used. These are loans signed but not yet used. We have got to pay 185.5 billion shillings. This should be criminal. This is wastage, money that is supposed to avail services in all of our constituencies. Uganda is paying for borrowing that has not happened, of government activities or a victory speech. It's an opportunity for accountability. The head of state built NRM's historical journey from 1959, the reach of PDM into 3.7 million households, and a projected 10% GDP growth. He talked about milk surpluses and coffee exports, dismissed young people seeking work abroad by calling Uganda a paradise, which they are abandoning, and named journalists whose writing displeases him. He did not speak with clarity about the debt that is consuming our country's future. The hospitals without medicines, the schools failing a generation of children, the roads deteriorating every rainy season, or the corruption documented in audit report after audit report. I think colleagues, they've pointed out some of these issues. The head of state built NRM's historical journey from 1959, the reach of PDM into 3.7 million households, and a projected 10% GDP growth. He talked about milk surpluses and coffee exports, dismissed young people seeking work abroad by calling Uganda a paradise, which they are abandoning, and named journalists whose writing displeases him. He did not speak with clarity about the debt that is consuming our country's future. The hospitals without medicines, the schools failing a generation of children, the roads deteriorating every rainy season, or the corruption documented in audit report after audit report. And I think colleagues, they've pointed out some of these issues. Colleagues, the true state of the nation is measured by whether citizens can access quality health care, afford education, find meaningful employment, earn a decent living, and live under institutions that are honest and accountable. The farmer wanted to know why inputs are expensive and why markets are unreliable. The unemployed graduate wanted to know where jobs would come from. The patient wanted to know why medicines are unavailable. The parent wanted to know why universal education still costs more than they can afford. The taxpayer wanted assurance that public resources will be protected from theft. Most of those questions, honestly, went unanswered. Right Honorable Speaker, I have prepared this response drawing on official government and public institutional sources, including the Auditor General, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, sector performance reports, budget documents, and parliamentary committee findings, reports that we have passed here as Parliament. The central question before this House is this: are the lives of ordinary Ugandan citizens improving? On that measure, there is considerable work to be done, colleagues. And I'm glad that that's a point that is admitted on both sides of the House. Honorable Speaker, let me tease out certain sectors, economy and public debt. The head of state cited GDP expansion to $69.3 billion US dollars and a per capita income of $1,420 US dollars, just above the lower middle income threshold of about $1,136 US dollars. Yet many Ugandans are asking a simple question. If the economy is growing, why is life becoming more difficult? Growth must show up in household incomes, employment, and access to services. The Ministry of Finance background to the budget financial year 2025-2026 report puts rural poverty at 19.4% against 10.3% in urban areas, and notes that 7 sub-regions, home to 44% of Uganda's population, account for 70% of the country's poor. These are Ministry of Finance figures. Growth that does not reduce poverty or improve the cost of living for ordinary families is in the end largely statistical. The most serious threat to Uganda's economic future is our public debt. Right, Honorable Speaker and colleagues, our public debt has risen from roughly 70 trillion shillings in financial year 2020-2021 to over 126 trillion shillings today. Listen to this, colleagues. This is an 80% increase in 5 years. 80% increase of our debt burden in just 5 years. That should worry all of us, colleagues. The debt to GDP ratio is at 53%, above the 50% threshold that was set by Uganda's own Charter for Fiscal Responsibility. And domestic interest to revenue has risen to 23.66%. More than 1 shilling in every 3 collected now goes to creditors before a teacher is paid or medicine procured. Interest payments have climbed steadily from 3.9 trillion shillings in financial year 2021-2022 to a projected 13 trillion shillings in financial year 2026-2027, for a cumulative 46.9 trillion over 6 years, all flowing to foreign-owned commercial banks. The financial year 2026-2027 budget adds a further 185.5 billion in commitment fees on loans signed but not yet used. These are loans signed but not yet used. We have got to pay 185.5 billion shillings. This should be criminal. This is wastage, money that is supposed to avail services in all of our constituencies. Uganda is paying for borrowing that has not happened. Honorable colleagues, we keep borrowing, but without corresponding returns. The Auditor General has reportedly flagged weak project implementation, delayed completion, cost overruns, and underutilized borrowed funds. Among them, the Lubowa Specialized Hospital arrangement with Enrique Pinetti, the local construction bailout, the Day by a Farmer bailout, the Inspire Africa Coffee venture in Ntungamo, and the Attack Sugar Factory under UDC. All private ventures financed through public borrowing, whose returns to citizens are yet to be demonstrated. Public revenue is being diverted from schools, hospitals, roads, and agriculture to service debt whose benefits ordinary Ugandans cannot see or feel. Sustainable growth requires prudent fiscal management, productive investment, value for money, and genuine accountability in the use of public resources. Honorable Speaker and colleagues, let me speak about cost of living and employment. One of the most glaring omissions, in my view, in the State of the Nation address was the rising cost of living. And we see this every day, everywhere in our constituencies. Households are grappling with food, transport, school, healthcare, and rent costs that together exhaust whatever income they earn. The UBOS National Governance, Peace and Security Survey of November 2025 shows that food accounts for over 50% of low-income household expenditure. Not a statistic to be tracked in a spreadsheet, but a household emergency at every meal. Fuel prices of 6,500 shillings and above per litre up country drive up the cost of everything that moves by road. And Uganda spends approximately 600 billion shillings annually on petroleum imports, priced in foreign and a market trader's fare. The employment picture is equally serious. Uganda's population currently stands at 45.9 million, yet only 9.4 million are in formal employment. Approximately 700,000 young people enter the labor market every year. While manufacturing, the sector best placed to absorb them, contributes only 8.4% to our country's GDP and employs only 8.3% of the workforce, below the 13% average for least developed countries. The formal economy cannot absorb what the population produces. That's a fact. And the consequence is visible on every street corner and in every family surviving on informal, insecure work. Between 2020 and 2025, an estimated 500,000 Ugandans took up work contracts abroad, most in the Middle East, under conditions widely documented as exploitative. These are not people abandoning a paradise, as is suggested. They are people searching for opportunities that they cannot find at home. A government that exports its youth as cheap labor and then mocks them for leaving has forfeited the moral authority to speak about their economic transformation. What is required is deliberate investment in industrialization, agro-processing, manufacturing, tourism, and genuine support for small and medium enterprises, with success measured by decent livelihoods created, not programs announced. Let me talk about corruption and accountability, which the Honorable Kutesa Kamali is very passionate about, and I applaud her for that. Corruption, colleagues, is still one of the biggest obstacles to Uganda's development. The Inspector General of Government, in their anti-corruption annual report 2024-2025, estimated that Uganda loses about 10 trillion shillings annually to corruption. 10 trillion shillings per year dissipates. The Auditor General's 2025 annual report found unaccounted funds, unsupported expenditure, and procurement irregularities in 72% of audited entities. These are government entities that are audited. Payroll audits continue to uncover thousands of ghost workers. And the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority has reported persistent irregularities in public contracting, including inflated prices and non-competitive awards. The cost is measured in schools not built, medicines not delivered, and opportunities denied. Parliament was told in January of 2026, this year, that only 31% of the Auditor General's recommendations for financial year 2023-2024 had been fully implemented, while more than a third were not implemented at all. The fight against corruption will be judged by stolen funds recovered, audit recommendations implemented, and the investigation, prosecution, and conviction of those responsible, regardless of office or political affiliation. Honorable Speaker, let me speak about human rights, civic freedoms, and justice. A nation's strength, colleagues, is measured not only by economic growth, but by its commitment to constitutional freedoms, human dignity, and the rule of law, an area that we always pay little attention to. The Uganda Human Rights Commission's quarterly report, that's January to April of this year, recorded over 1,200 claimants of arbitrary arrest, torture, enforced disappearance, and lawful detention, a 34% increase on the same period in 2025. So this only gets worse. At least 47 journalists and media workers faced arrest, harassment, and confiscation of their equipment in the preceding 12 months. Arbitrary arrests feed directly into the crisis in our prisons and our courts. Even those produced in courts spend lengthy periods without getting justice. And the proposals by our head of state to abolish bail for a number of offenses does not help matters, colleagues. found 115 of 413 children in one rehabilitation center had completed their sentences, but were still being held because the system lacked capacity to process their release. This is wrong, colleagues. The chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, Mariam Wangadya, has publicly accused some state actors of deliberately weakening this vital institution. She has argued that despite the Commission's critical constitutional mandate to safeguard the rights enshrined in Chapter 4 of our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, appointments have been made on political considerations rather than competence. She described some appointees as broke and sickly political failures, suggesting that such appointments have undermined the Commission's effectiveness. This matter ought to be addressed. When we see government officials speaking out, lambasting publicly, this has got to be looked into. I hope government will. Constitutional rights are not privileges granted at government's discretion. They belong to every Ugandan by virtue of the Constitution. And security agencies must operate within the law, with every citizen enjoying equal protection under it. Right Honorable Speaker and colleagues, sometimes government blames opposition, civil society and media houses for making the country look bad. But if we are to be honest with ourselves, we would realize that some government officials contribute a great deal to making our country look bad. Whenever people are abducted and tortured, or when media houses get closed arbitrarily, these violations of the law make it to international press, and you've been seeing international press report about these issues. How then do we expect tourists to come to our country with all these negative situations? We've been dealing with a situation where most of the world thought numerous people were dying of Ebola in Uganda, which of course was not true. But travel advisories were issued and many would-be tourists cancelled their visits to Uganda, which affected our tourism. And as we clarified to the world that the Ebola situation in Uganda was blown out of proportion and misunderstood, and I think government have been seeing government officials speak out. I saw Alan Kasuja, Uganda Media Center, ED and others saying, look, the problem is not as has been described in this our country, which is a good thing, that you get to defend our country and the facts come out, because people think Ugandans are dropping dead of Ebola every day. That's not true. So as we continue to clarify and defend our country, which we must be able to do as government, we find ourselves having to deal with international press reports about violations of the law. So we need to address all these issues. Potential investors want to come and set up business in Uganda to employ our young people. But this can easily get discouraged because of what they see and hear. This hurts our economy and it affects all of us, colleagues. Civil society organizations have been targeted for suspension and closure. Most of them have had their accounts frozen by the state. No explanations, no court orders. Why does government target people and entities who point out the ills in our governance instead of addressing those ills? We have to build this our country together. So dissenting voices should not be targeted for persecution. We need to listen to the issues of concern being raised and then we work towards fixing those issues. Right Honorable Speaker and colleagues, we held our national election at the start of this year. But there are still many unanswered questions. Why does the military continue to interfere with our elections? This did not just happen to we opposition competitors, by the way. I saw a number of colleagues from the NRM raising similar concerns in their constituencies as well. Why hasn't government accounted for the billions spent on the biometric voter verification kit, which did not function on election day? Why hasn't the Electoral Commission publicized the declaration of results forms which they based on to declare results? Colleagues, our country needs to heal from the tumult that has become of our elections. But we can only do so, we can only heal when these questions are sufficiently responded to. Mr. Speaker and colleagues, let me talk about health. Patients face medicine stockouts long waiting times, inadequate staffing, and rising out-of-pocket costs. For many families, illness is simultaneously a health emergency and a financial crisis. Somebody once said, most Ugandans are one medical bill away from poverty. The Ministry of Health Sector Performance Report of Financial Year 2024-2025 shows malaria is responsible for 27% of outpatient visits and 19% of inpatient deaths, placing Uganda among the top 10 countries globally for malaria burden. HIV prevalence stands at 5.3%. Tuberculosis affects 200 per 100,000 people, with a 72% treatment success rate against the World Health Organization's 85%. Non-communicable diseases account for 33% of hospital admissions and 11% of deaths, with hypertension affecting 26% of adults and diabetes 5%, mostly undiagnosed. Skilled birth attendance falls to 55% in rural areas against the 74% national average. So the national average looks fair. We need to now address the rural one, because national average is 74%. That's fair. But the problem is now in the rural areas, which we need to address. And a contraceptive prevalence rate of 39% drives a total fertility rate of 4.7 children per woman. The doctor-to-patient ratio in Uganda is 1 to 25,000. Health Organization recommendation of 1 to 1,000. Over 56% of approved health worker posts are vacant. And 60% of Ugandan trained doctors leave the public system within 5 years. The 132.6 billion that is allocated to recruit 16,963 health workers is welcome. But without addressing pay, working conditions, and career development, new recruits will simply accelerate the exodus. They will leave. We also continue to entreat government to abandon the plan to stop facilitating medical interns. This policy is counterproductive. Financing is the most fundamental failure. The financial year 2026-2027 health budget stands at 5.7 trillion, 6.1% of the national budget, and it has remained unchanged from last year, and less than half of the 15% Abuja Declaration, which we committed to as a country. Government signed this 2 decades ago. Per capita public health spending is at $37, less than half the WHO minimum of $86. National medical stores required 1.5 trillion in financial year 2024-2025 and received 1.4 trillion, while Mulago National Referral Hospital received 18.2 billion against a documented need of 72.3 billion. This is our national referral. Let's fund it more, because that's a 75% funding gap at the country's flagship hospital. Development partners finance 64% of essential medicines in financial year 24-25. Government contributed 36%. Over 41% of health costs are paid directly out of pocket, and 40% of facilities experienced drug stockouts of antimalarials, antibiotics, and antiretrovirals in 2023. Uganda has got 1 ambulance per 200,000 people. 1 per 200,000 people. That's why colleagues always buy ambulances. Ideally, we shouldn't be doing that, but we end up doing it because of this gap. Only 12% of facilities have got functioning emergency units, and referral hospitals operate at roughly 10% of ICU capacity due to inadequate staffing. Mental health apparently is the most neglected area of all. 75% of Ugandans who live with mental disorders receive no treatment. 75% of the Ugandans who live with mental disorders receive no treatment. Only 5 dedicated mental health units exist nationwide, and the sector receives less than 1% of the health budget against a WHO recommendation of 5%. Right, Honorable Speaker, we have severally demanded for the completion of Lubowa Specialized Hospital and proper accountability for the billions spent on that project thus far. Government needs to provide answers to the questions about Lubowa Hospital. Incidentally, I'm interested in this hospital being up and running. Some people think that we in the opposition, we want the project to fail and for government to look bad. Actually, I want this project up and running so that taxpayer money is accounted for. But more importantly, for people to be able to access healthcare. They don't have to then run out of the country. So we are waiting for Lubowa Specialized Hospital. Let me talk about education. Honorable members, few matters weigh on Ugandan families as heavily as education. Yet we often give the challenge in this sector little serious attention. The Auditor General's report for the year ended 31st December 2025 found that across 157 local governments inspected, 136 secondary schools had no science laboratory, and a further 270 had laboratories that were inadequately equipped. Yet government introduced a policy to promote sciences. 182 schools lacked libraries. 251 had no teacher accommodation. 380 reported inadequate classrooms, with some schools operating condemned pit latrines. And this is dangerous for our little children. There were cracked walls and deteriorating roofs. Government speaks of competence-based learning, yet many schools lack the infrastructure to implement it. We need to fix this. Learning outcomes are equally alarming. The 2025 National Assessment of Progress in Education report found that more than 60% of primary 6 learners could not read a simple passage in English or perform basic numeracy. This is a government report. After decades of investment in universal primary education, the national pupil-teacher ratio stands at 53:1, exceeding 70:1 in several districts. To 1. Secondary gross enrollment sits at only 29%, and technical and vocational institutions enroll fewer than 400,000 learners against a youth population exceeding 10 million. In that relevant age bracket. The UPE capitation grant of only 18,600 shillings per learner and 21,000 for learners with special needs is insufficient, honestly. Thank you, Honorable. Pushing schools. This pushes schools to levy charges on parents, a practice that undermines the principle of universal education. Think about it, colleagues. 18,600 shillings per learner, not per term, but per year. How is this child supposed to compete globally in this day and age? It's not possible. So we are saying UPE is a good program. It's a good initiative. But we are not funding it, and that's why it's failing. That's why children, 60% they're in P6, they can't read a sentence in English. So we need to put more money there, now that we are all saying it's a good program. Because on this we agree. Government side and opposition, UPE is a good program. So why aren't we funding what we are all agreeing on to be good? Right, Honourable Speaker and colleagues, salary disparities between science and arts and primary teachers have weakened morale and fueled attrition. We welcomed the increase in pay for science teachers, but there is no reason why the same does not happen for arts teachers as well. Government must substantially increase investment in school infrastructure, review capitation grants to reflect the current realities, recruit and retain qualified teachers, strengthen technical and vocational education, and prioritize learning outcomes as the central measure of success. Or we risk producing a generation enrolled in school but unprepared for a modern world. Let me talk about agriculture and rural livelihoods. Agriculture employs approximately 68% of Uganda's workforce and contributes 24% to our GDP. Yet production, measured as value added per worker, stands at just $462 US dollars per year, among the lowest in East Africa. That's according to the Ministry of Agriculture Sector Performance Report. Again, government figures. The head of state highlighted selected success stories in dairy and coffee, but did not pay sufficient attention to the structural constraints that are trapping millions of smallholder farmers in low productivity and poor returns. Uganda has approximately 1 extension worker per 2,000 farmers, against a recommended ratio of 1 per 400. With more than 5,000 extension positions vacant nationwide in all of our constituencies, the Auditor General's report of 2025 found only 44% of required extension workers across 135 local governments were fully employed. Meaning farmers who are receiving PDM money through their circles don't have technical guidance to use it productively, because who is supposed to guide them? The positions are vacant. Only 4.6% of cultivated land is under irrigation, and post-harvest losses run 30 to 40% for perishable crops. Destruction of value caused not by farmers failing to produce, but by our failure to provide storage, cold chains, and market infrastructure. PDM, Parish Development Model, disburses 100 million shillings per parish annually. That's roughly 4,000 per household per month. A sum that honestly cannot transform smallholder productivity. And some of our parishes have a lot more people than others. That's the reality.
We agreed on 30 minutes. I'm seeing I'm already in 43 minutes. So I don't know what we are going to do, and I'm seeing your statement is still long.
I seek your indulgence to run as quickly as I can.
Yeah, please do, since we have it all, on record, and it's going to be debated, and you'll get more time to respond to some of the issues.
Let me move to ICT and digital transformation. Right, Honourable Speaker and members, the opposition shares government's aspiration for a digitally connected Uganda. So on that we also agree. But digital transformation must be measured by whether citizens can access affordable internet, whether technology genuinely improves service delivery and accountability, not by systems launched or fiber laid. I'll now keep skipping a few things here and there. Let me move to works and transport. Honourable members, the head of state highlighted investment in roads and the standard gauge railway, but did not pay sufficient attention to the maintenance crisis that is consuming what has already been built. Supports regional integration, and the Pan-African vision is one that we share. But meaningful integration requires more than declarations. The EAC Secretariat's Regional Integration Report of 2025 shows intra-EAC trade at only about 18% of total regional trade. And the East African Monetary Union, originally targeted for 2025, has been postponed indefinitely for lack of the fiscal indiscipline and institutional convergence that it requires. Now that we are promoting EAC, we need to act upon it. Honourable Speaker, I did see the other day a lawyer within the region who is licensed to practice here being barred from accessing our country. And she was issued a decision that you are not wanted here, persona non grata. Let's follow the process even as that happens. She probably should have been given a chance to explain herself that this is what we are charging you with. You then have a chance to explain yourself. When we expel, we have been complaining about South Africans who are expelling nationals, including Ugandans. Let's not do the same. In conclusion, Right Honourable Speaker and colleagues, the facts presented in this, my response, paint a clear picture. While progress has been made in some areas, many Ugandans continue to face poverty, unemployment, poor public services, and growing pressure on their livelihoods. And the gap between official claims and daily experience is still wide. Ugandans want decent healthcare, quality education, reliable infrastructure, opportunities to earn a living, accountable government, management of public resources, and respect for the rule of law by all institutions. These are reasonable expectations. They're not out of the world or wild expectations, really. And they should be at the center of government action. The opposition will continue to advocate for these priorities and to hold government accountable for its commitments to the people of Uganda. We love this country dearly. Let me say that again. We love this country dearly. And we commit to working towards its betterment. That's precisely why we keep raising the concerns that we do, so that we get to fix them. And when our country thrives, we all thrive, all of us. I say all this for God and my country. Thank you.